The hidden pain of conditional worth in children, raised in wealthy or high expectation families. Children who grow up wealthy or privileged are often assumed to have everything. But beneath the comfort and resources is something far more dangerous. The internalized belief that their worth must be earned, justified, and proven through flawless performance. Their hidden wound is this: affection feels conditional, achievement feels required, imperfection feels unforgivable. There's a kind of silence you learn to live inside. Not the peaceful, meditative silence people romanticize, but the heavy, pressurized silence of a child who grows up knowing that the world is watching and expecting nothing short of excellence. You grew up with a roof over your head, every door unlocked, every opportunity technically available, and yet you lived inside an invisible cage made of expectations so subtle, so socially acceptable, that no one ever called them what they truly were. Demands, conditions, standards disguised as love. Because you learn young that in a wealthy family, in a successful family, in a highly accomplished family, you don't just grow up, you perform. Every day, every moment, every version of you must be curated, controlled, and correct. And you know the paradox well. The very life that protected you has also imprisoned you. The very privilege that was supposed to give you freedom is the same thing that taught you to never mess up. You were raised in comfort, but conditioned under pressure. You were given everything, yet allowed to be almost nothing that wasn't impressive. People assume your life is easy, that you're lucky, that you should be grateful, but they don't see the other side of privilege, the side where love gets braided with achievement, where affection is tangled with accomplishment, where being good enough is never simply being yourself. It's being perfect. You grew up learning that mistakes aren't just mistakes, they're disappointments. Imperfections aren't quirks, they're risks. Because in your family, excellence wasn't celebrated, it was required. The world saw your wealth, but the world never saw the weight. Not the pressure you carried in silence, not the nights you couldn't sleep because your mind replayed every possible flaw. Not the way you learned to measure your worth in performance, not personhood. And here is the painful paradox at the core of it all. The thing that made you successful as a child, your ability to perform perfection, is the thing sabotaging your ability to feel lovable as an adult. Let's talk about that deeply, psychologically, honestly, because this wound is real, and it's time someone finally put words to it. The archetype we're talking about has a psychological foundation that is rarely acknowledged. Children raised in high-achieving or wealthy environments often internalize conditional worth, even when parents believe they're being supportive. Let's name the processes shaping this inner world. 1. The golden child complex. This isn't about being spoiled, it's about being symbolic. In family systems theory, a golden child is the one who carries the family's image, hope, and pride. Their role is to validate the family's success simply by existing flawlessly. You weren't allowed to just be a child. You were the family's resume, a living extension of their reputation. And that turns every choice, every grade, every friend, every hobby into a performance. 2. Conditional positive regard. Coined by Carl Rogers. This is the phenomenon where love and approval are given only when the child meets certain expectations. Your parents may have never said, "We love you when you succeed," and pulled away when you failed. Yet their reactions, tones, questions, and body language taught you exactly that. Pride was loud, disappointment was silent, but suffocating. So your nervous system learned an equation. Success equals safety, failure equals withdrawal. This neurological pairing wires the brain for perfectionism, shame sensitivity, and compulsive achievement. 3. Hyper-performance anxiety and the default mode network. The default mode network, your brain's self-referential thought system, gets shaped by early emotional environments. In children who grow up with pressure to be perfect, the DMN becomes overactive, spinning constant internal questions like, "Am I good enough? What will they think? Did I disappoint them? Is this perfect yet?" Your mind became a stage director, your identity the ongoing rehearsal. Your brain wasn't shaped by comfort, it was shaped by constant anticipation. Anticipation of judgment, Anticipation of comparison. Anticipation of never quite measuring up. The metaphor, the glass child. Unlike the invisible child, the glass child is always seen, but only from the outside. People see right through you, but they don't actually see you. Your value is measured by clarity, brilliance, and flawlessness. A smudge becomes a crisis. A crack becomes humiliation. Growing up wealthy or privileged doesn't remove pressure. It replaces survival struggles with performance struggles. And those can be far more silent, far more hidden, but just as damaging. The internal cost no one imagines a privileged child would carry. Because the tragedy of this archetype is not lack of resources. It's the absence of unconditional humanity. You paid for your privilege with your personhood, with your authenticity, with your right to be messy, confused, afraid, and average. The real burden wasn't the expectation of excellence. It was the disappearance of your right to simply exist. And the grief is enormous. The grief of never knowing what love without performance feels like. The grief of learning early that affection has prerequisites. The grief of realizing that your achievements were applauded louder than your emotions. Again, the paradox. The more perfect you became, the less human you felt. And the less human you felt, the harder you worked to be perfect. Perfection became both your armor and your prison. Let's bring in a philosophical frame. Aristotle once said, "To be excellent is not an act, but a habit." But no one tells you the darker side. When excellence becomes a habit too early, it stops being a choice and starts being a cage. You didn't learn excellence out of joy. You learned it out of fear. Fear of rejection, fear of losing connection, fear that one misstep would reveal that you weren't actually worthy, that you were only tolerated because you performed well. And that fear follows you everywhere. In moments of rest, you feel guilty. In moments of success, you feel relief, never pride. In moments of imperfection, you feel defective. This is the hidden emotional cost of privilege. A lifetime of performing a self you don't fully believe in, for an audience you can't disappoint, with stakes that were never meant for a child to carry. So how does this childhood pressure transform into adult behavior? Let's bring it into clarity, because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. 1. You become extremely self-critical, not because you enjoy perfection, but because you're terrified of the consequences of imperfection. Your inner voice sounds like a strict coach, not a comforting friend. 2. You excel professionally but feel like a fraud. Even when you succeed, you attribute it to luck, timing, or external conditions. Because if your worth was conditional in childhood, your success in adulthood never feels secure. 3. You struggle with intimacy, not because you don't want closeness, but because vulnerability feels like failure. You learn to present curated versions of yourself. Rawness feels dangerous. 4. You apologize for your emotions. You fear being too much. You fear being a burden. You over-explain, over-justify, and over-fix. Because the rule was always, be impressive, not inconvenient. 5. You overwork to the point of exhaustion. You don't understand rest. You know activity, achievement, and output, but not peace. Rest feels like laziness. Softness feels like regression. 6. You tailor your identity around expectations. Your career choices, relationships, hobbies, and even aesthetics, all subtly shaped by what will make them proud, what will prove my worth, what fits the family narrative. This is the heartbreak. Your personality is not your identity, it's your coping strategy. And the turning point, the beginning of unlearning, is not to force yourself to change, but to witness the pattern without judgment. To stop gaslighting yourself by saying, it wasn't that bad, I had everything, or it's not real trauma. Because this is trauma, not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet, elegant, socially accepted kind. The kind wrapped in success, the kind disguised as opportunity, the kind that hides behind, "you're so lucky." Unlearning begins when you finally allow yourself to say, I was privileged, yes, but I was also pressured, and both truths can coexist. So how do you heal this? How do you reclaim the parts of you that were buried under expectation? 1. Inner child reparenting. You learn to give yourself what was missing. Unconditional acceptance. The right to fail. The right to rest. The right to be soft. You tell your inner child, you don't need to earn your place. You're allowed to simply exist. 2. Shadow work. You turn toward the parts of yourself you were taught to hide. Your insecurity, fear, messiness, imperfection. You let them speak. You let them breathe. You let them belong. 3. Reclaiming authenticity through micro-choices. Stop choosing the impressive option. Start choosing the honest one. Not the degree they admire, the path you genuinely want. Not the partner who fits the family's image, but the one who fits your soul. Not the life that looks perfect, but the life that feels real. 4. Practicing softness intentionally. Softness is not weakness. It's self-return. It's detoxing from performance. It's the slow, steady relearning of humanity. 5. Rewriting the worth equation. Your worth is not a scoreboard, not a resume, not a reputation. Your worth is in your breath, your being, your existence. As Carl Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who your family needed you to be, not who society applauded you for being. Who you are, and here's the truth, you don't need to be fixed. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to perform for love that should have been given freely. You need to become whole again. You carry the silent pressure of perfection for long enough. It's time to set it down. It's time to belong to yourself. It's time to choose a life that feels like freedom, not performance. If this spoke to you, if you recognized yourself in these words, share this with someone who might need it too. And if you want more long-form psychological explorations like this, consider subscribing. Because you deserve a life that isn't built on pressure, but on presence. Not on performance, but on truth. Not on perfection, but on peace. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy. You just have to be you.